"Can you come get me?" the secretary whispered, and the Mafia boss heard her fear. The phone was the only thing in my hand that wasn't shaking, and that was only because I was holding it so hard my knuckles had gone white. I was on the floor of a parking garage on the wrong side of Chicago, my back pressed against a cold concrete pillar, my knees pulled up to my chest. There was a scrape on my forearm, thin and stinging, from where I'd hit the pavement when I ran. My white blouse was untucked. One heel was gone, lost somewhere between the elevator and the stairwell, and I didn't remember dropping it. 3 levels up, an engine idled in the dark. 2 men were looking for me, and they weren't trying very hard to be quiet about it, because they thought I had nowhere to go. They were almost right. I scrolled through my contacts with my thumb, and every name felt like a door that was already locked. My mother was dead. My father was the reason I was here, though he didn't know it yet, and he was 3 states away, pretending he had nothing to do with men like the ones above me. I had no friends I could drag into this. I had a landlord who hated me, and a sister who hadn't spoken to me in 2 years. And then there was one name, the last one I should have called, the one I told myself, every single day, that I would never need. Severo Castellan, my boss, the most dangerous man I had ever stood next to, and I'd stood next to him every morning for 14 months, handing him coffee and folders and lies I didn't know were lies. He paid me to manage his calendar and his calls, and to ask no questions, and I had been very, very good at asking no questions. I pressed the call button before I could talk myself out of it. It rang once, just once. Serafina. His voice was low and even, the way it always was, like nothing in the world had ever surprised him. "It's after midnight." I opened my mouth and nothing came out at first. The fear had climbed all the way up into my throat and built a wall there. Above me, a car door slammed. Footsteps. A flashlight beam swept the level below mine, and I pulled my knees in tighter and made myself as small as the dark would let me. "Can you come get me?" I whispered. My eyes were burning. I was trying so hard not to cry because crying made noise, and noise was the one thing I couldn't afford. "Please, I think someone's going to—" I heard him go still, not silent. Still, the kind of stillness that has weight to it, that fills a room even through a phone. "Where are you?" It wasn't a question anymore. A parking garage, off Wacker, near the old freight building. Lower level. There are 2 of them. My breath kept catching. They followed me from my apartment. "I don't know who they are. I locked myself in the stairwell, but it doesn't lock. It just looks like it does." "Are you hurt?" "No. A little. I'm okay." "Serafina." And here his voice changed. It dropped lower, and underneath the calm I heard something I had never heard from him in 14 months. Something hot and tight and barely held down. "Listen to me. You are going to stay exactly where you are. You are going to keep this line open. Don't hang up. Don't move toward the cars. Can you do that for me?" "Yes. Good girl. I'm already moving." I heard a door close on his end, sharp and final. I heard him say something in a language that wasn't English, fast and clipped, to someone else in the room. I heard the city in the background, and then I understood that he was already in motion, that the moment I'd whispered into the phone, the whole machine of his world had started to turn. For a man like Severo, getting somewhere fast was never the problem. The problem, always, was deciding that something was worth moving for, and he had decided in one ring. I didn't know yet what that meant. I only knew that the fear in my chest loosened by exactly 1 notch, because for the first time all night I wasn't alone in the dark. I should tell you how I got there, on that floor. My name is Serafina Voss. I am 23 years old. For most of my life I believed my father was an accountant, a quiet, gray man who worked for important people and never talked about it. I found out the truth at 19, the year my mother died, when I overheard him on the phone promising someone named the family that he could move money no one would ever find. My father wasn't an accountant. He was a launderer, and the people he worked for were the same people my new boss spent his nights at war with. I didn't know that part when I took the job. I want that on the record. I answered an ad for an executive assistant at a company that, on paper, owned shipping and real estate and 3 restaurants. The man who interviewed me had eyes the color of cold coffee and a way of looking at me like he was reading a page I hadn't written yet. He asked me one question that wasn't on any list. "Why does a woman as sharp as you want to be invisible?" And I told him the truth before I could stop myself. Because invisible people are safe. He hired me that afternoon. I learned what Severo Castellan really was the way you learn the temperature of water. Slowly, and then all at once. The way men went quiet when he entered a room. The way a city councilman once shook so hard handing over an envelope that he dropped it. The way no one, ever, raised their voice to him, and how that silence was scarier than shouting. He ran half the river district and most of what moved through the port, and his name closed deals before he finished saying hello. I was good at my job. I kept his world running and my head down. I told myself the cold thing between us, the polite distance, the way he never touched me, never even let our hands meet when I gave him a folder, was professionalism. I told myself I didn't notice the way he watched me leave the office every evening, or the way he'd memorized that I take my coffee with too much sugar and started leaving the right one on my desk without a word. I told myself a lot of things. Most of them were lies, too. I just didn't know it yet. The garage flooded with light. Not slowly. All at once, headlights flaring across the concrete from the ramp. 3 sets of them, engines that sounded expensive and angry. I heard the 2 men above me start to run, and then I heard them stop, because there was nowhere to run to. Severo hadn't sent 1 car. He'd sealed the exits. I heard him before I saw him. His footsteps were unhurried, which somehow made them worse. A slow, steady rhythm coming down the ramp while everyone around him was frozen. When he came around the pillar and found me on the floor, I watched something break across his face that I had never seen there, and then watched him put it away just as fast, because there were other people there, and Severo Castellan did not let other people see his face break. He crouched in front of me, up close, in the dark. The cold coffee eyes weren't cold at all. "There she is," he said very quietly, like the words were only for me. He looked at the scrape on my arm, at my bare foot, at the tear tracks I hadn't managed to hide. His jaw tightened. "Who touched you?" "No one. I ran before they could." "Good." He took off his suit jacket and put it around my shoulders, and it was warm, and it smelled like cedar and something darker, and I hadn't realized I was cold until I stopped being it. "Then they get to keep their hands. For now." He stood and held one hand down to me. I took it. His grip was warm and sure, and he pulled me up like I weighed nothing, and for 1 second we were too close, my hand still in his eyes moving over my face like he was counting something. Then he stepped back, and the second ended. "Lucio," he said, not loudly. A wide, scarred man near the cars straightened. "The 2 upstairs. I want to know who sent them, and I want to know tonight. Don't damage their mouths." "Yes, Pakhan." That word, Pakhan, the Russian word for boss, the one his men used when they wanted to remind themselves what he was, landed in my stomach like a stone. I'd heard it before. It had never been about me before. He turned back to me, and the hardness in him folded away again. Just for me. Just for that look. "Come on," he said. "You're not staying in the city tonight where they can find you. You're coming with me." I should have said no. A smart, invisible woman would have said no. I put my hand in his, and let him walk me to the car. The penthouse sat at the top of a black glass tower, and the whole city lay underneath it like spilled jewels. Severo lived above his world the way he lived in it, apart, watching, never quite touching the ground. He sat me on a couch that probably cost more than my apartment, and crouched in front of me again with a first aid kit, and the sight of this man, who could make grown men weep with a phone call, carefully cleaning a scrape on my arm with his big hands. It did something to me. He was gentle in a way that didn't match anything else about him. "You're staring," I said, because I get sarcastic when I'm scared. "It's a defect. I'm working." A small line appeared at the corner of his mouth, almost a smile. "Hold still. Is this part of the job?" Because it wasn't in the description. "Serafina." He taped the gauze down and looked up at me, and the almost smile was gone. "Why didn't you call the police?" I looked at my hands. Because the men who came for me had police radios. I heard one of them. They knew my name. They knew where I parked. My throat went tight again. Somebody told them. Somebody who knew my routine. The only people who know my routine are the people in your building. He didn't blink, but I'd learned to read him over 14 months, and I saw the information go into him and rearrange something behind his eyes. "So you called the most dangerous person you know," he said slowly, "because you'd already worked out that the danger and the safety were coming from the same place." "I called you," I said, "because some animal part of my brain decided you were the one person in the world who wouldn't let anything happen to me. I don't know why. You've never given me a reason." I laughed. and it came out wet and broken. You barely talk to me. He went still again. That weighted stillness. I don't talk to you, he said, because every time I do, I want to keep doing it. And men in my position don't get to keep things they want. They get to keep the things they need to survive. Everything else gets taken away to hurt them. He stood, and the city light fell across his face. You've been a thing I wanted for 14 months, Serafina. I made you invisible to my whole world so no one would ever know that. So no one would ever do exactly what someone did tonight. The room was very quiet. My heart was not. That didn't work, I said. No, he agreed, and his voice was rough. It didn't. I didn't sleep much that first night. I lay in a guest room with sheets softer than anything I'd ever owned, and listened to him pace the floor below, on the phone, voice low, switching between English and Russian and Italian, like he was changing weapons. Somewhere in the dark, the machine of his world was tearing through the city looking for the men who'd hunted me, and I was the reason. In the morning, Lucio came back with answers, and the answers changed everything. I learned them the way I learn everything, by listening at a door I wasn't invited to stand behind. It came from inside, Lucio was saying. One of ours, Donato. He sold her routine to the Marchetti crew. 2,000 for the schedule, 10 on delivery. Marchetti. Severo's voice was flat. Why would the Marchettis want my secretary? That's the part you're not gonna like. A pause. They don't want your secretary. They want the launderer's daughter. Her father's been moving Marchetti money for years and skimming it. 3 million, maybe 4. When the old man got caught short, he told them he'd make it right. And then he gave them her, his own kid, as collateral, to buy himself time. I had to put my hand over my own mouth. My father, my quiet gray father, had handed me to monsters to cover his own theft. The men in the garage hadn't come to kill me. They'd come to collect me, like a debt, like a thing. I didn't decide to walk into the room. My feet just did it. Severo's head came up the instant I crossed the threshold, and whatever he saw on my face made him cross the floor toward me fast. You heard. My father sold me. The words felt insane in my mouth. He owed them money he stole, and he gave them me. I was shaking, and not from cold this time. How long have you known? About my father. Did you know when you hired me? And here is where the floor of my whole life tilted, because Severo Castellan, who never lied to me, didn't answer fast enough. Say it, I whispered. I knew who your father was when I hired you. His jaw was tight. I knew the Marchettis were using him. I hired you to keep you close, to keep you safe, and to know, the moment they made a move, that I had something they wanted before they had it. The room went white at the edges, so I was a chess piece, the whole time. You didn't make me invisible to protect me. You made me a secret so you could keep your advantage. At first. He didn't look away from me, and I'll give him that. He didn't hide behind anything. At first, you were leverage I was holding for a war I knew was coming. And then somewhere in the first month you stopped being leverage and became the reason I didn't want the war to touch anything. I have lied to a lot of people, Serafina. Not about that. Never about that. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to slap him. I wanted, God help me, to fall into him. And the wanting and the betrayal were the same size, and that scared me more than the men in the garage. I need air, I said, and my voice cracked right down the middle. He let me go to the far end of the room. He didn't follow. He just stood there in the morning light with his hands open at his sides, a man who could take anything in the city and didn't take the one step toward me he wanted to take, because for once it wasn't his to take. I stood at the glass for a long time. The city was very far down. Somewhere out there my father was breathing, having traded my life for time, and somewhere out there a crew of men had been promised my body as payment, and the only wall between me and all of it was a man who had built our entire relationship on a quiet, careful lie. But I am my mother's daughter, not my father's, and my mother taught me one thing before the cancer took her. Never wait to be rescued by the same hand that put you in the cage. Decide for yourself. So I decided. I turned around. If I'm leverage, I said, then I'm leverage that talks. I want to be in every conversation. I'm not going to sit in a guest room and be moved around a board. They came for me, so I get a say in what happens to them. Something moved across his face. Surprise. And then something warmer. Something that looked almost like pride. There she is, he said again. Softer this time. The next 4 days, I stopped being invisible. I sat in on the calls. I learned the shape of his world from the inside instead of from the calendar. I learned that Donato, the man who'd sold me, was already gone. Severo didn't tell me how, and I didn't ask. And I noticed that I didn't feel as horrified as I thought I should, and that frightened me about myself, a little. I learned that the Marchettis were not patient men, and that my father's debt had become my debt the moment he signed me over, and that there were only two ways debts like that ended. I also learned Severo, the real one, not the cold statue behind the desk. I learned he didn't sleep. I learned he could be funny in a dry, sideways way that landed when you least expected it. The night I dropped an entire pot of coffee on his $10,000 rug and braced for fury, he looked at the brown, stain spreading across the white, and said, "I've had men killed for less." And then, when my face went pale, "That was a joke, Serafina. Sit down before you faint and ruin the rug twice." I learned he kept a single photograph in his desk, a woman with my coloring and his eyes. His mother, killed when he was 16, by men who wanted to hurt his father. I learned why he believed that everything he loved would be used against him. He had the proof carved into his whole life. "That's why you keep everyone at a distance," I said. We were on the terrace, the city humming below us, a bottle of wine open between us that neither of us was really drinking. "That's why I keep everyone at a distance." He turned the glass in his fingers without lifting it. "My father loved my mother where the world could see it, so the world took her to break him. He never recovered. He spent the next 10 years burning everything down out of grief and handed me an empire built on revenge instead of sense. I swore I'd never give anyone that kind of power over me. And then you hired a launderer's daughter to use as a bargaining chip," I said, and accidentally got attached. "You really are bad at this." He laughed. An actual laugh, short and surprised, like it had escaped before he could stop it. "I'm catastrophic at this," he agreed. He looked at me, and the laugh faded into something heavier. "You should be running from me as fast as those heels of yours can carry you. Instead, you're sitting on my terrace insulting me." "I lost the heels in the garage," I said. "And I don't run from things. I look at them until I understand them. You're the most dangerous thing I've ever looked at." The air between us went tight and warm. He set his glass down. I set mine down. Neither of us moved, and the not moving was louder than anything. "Serafina." My name in his mouth was a low, rough thing. "If I touch you, there is no version of this where I let you go afterward. I want you to understand that before you keep looking at me like that. I don't share, I don't release, and I don't survive losing things twice. So look at me until you understand that too." I understood it. That was the terrifying part. I understood it completely, and I leaned in anyway. And the first time his mouth touched mine, the whole careful distance of 14 months collapsed at once, and I felt him shudder like a man who'd been holding his breath for a year. Then his phone rang, and the world came back. The Marchettis had moved. They'd taken my father, not to punish him, to bait us. They'd figured out, the way men like that always do, that the launderer's daughter had stopped hiding and started standing next to the most powerful man in the city. And they knew that whatever Severo wanted, you could hurt him with. The message was simple. The girl, in exchange for the old man. A bridge over the river, 3 a.m, no soldiers. Severo read it once and put the phone face down on the table with a control so complete it was worse than rage. "No," he said. "Severo, no, you're not going. There's nothing to discuss." And here is where I stopped being a thing that got protected and became a person who decided. I stood up. "My father is a coward and a thief, and he sold me," I said. "And I am still not going to let them put a bullet in him to make a point. But I'm also not going to let you walk into a bridge at 3 a.m. and trade your life for either of us out of some grief you've been carrying since you were 16. So we are not doing this your way, and we are not doing this their way. We are doing it mine." He stared at me. "You don't have a way. You've known this world for 4 days. I've known you for 14 months, I said. "And I've watched you win every negotiation you ever had by knowing something the other side didn't. So that's what we do. We give them something they don't expect." I told him my plan. He didn't like it. He liked even less that it was good. The bridge at 3 a.m. was cold, and the river underneath it was black and slow. I walked out into the middle of the span alone, exactly like they'd asked. My heels, new ones, loud on the wet pavement. The Marchetti car was already there, headlights low. My father stood between 2 men, and when he saw me his face crumpled, and he started to say my name, and I looked at him and said, "Don't," and he stopped. The man in charge stepped forward. Older, silver-haired, a smile like a knife laid flat. "The little secretary," he said. "Castellane sent you alone. Disappointing. I expected more fight from him." "He didn't send me," I said. "I came. There's a difference, and it's going to matter to you in about 30 seconds. That was the line. The signal. Because here's the thing the Marchettis didn't know. The thing my 4 days inside Severo's world had taught me. The war they thought they were fighting was already lost, and not because of guns. My father had skimmed $3 million of Marchetti money, yes, but in 4 days, with Severo's people and my own memory of every account I'd ever heard my father mention as a child, we'd found where it went, and we'd found the rest of it. The whole accounting of every dirty dollar the Marchetti family had moved for 15 years, the ledgers, the names, the federal indictment-shaped truth of all of it, copied, sealed, and sitting with 3 different people who would send it to 3 different places if I didn't make a phone call by sunrise. "You can shoot me," I said, and I was surprised at how steady my voice was. "You can shoot my father, and the moment you do, everything your family has ever hidden goes to the FBI, the Bureau's Organized Crime Task Force, and a journalist at the Tribune who's been waiting 20 years for it. I'm not a hostage. I'm a dead man's switch, and I'm the only one who can turn it off." The silver-haired man's smile didn't move, but his eyes did, and that was when I knew I had him. "You're bluffing. Account ending 4412, I said. "The Cayman shell under the name Brightwater Holdings. The $2 million you moved through the produce company in March." I watched the color leave his face one fact at a time. I grew up listening to numbers I wasn't supposed to hear. Turns out I remember all of them. That was when Severo stepped out of the dark at the end of the bridge. Unhurried, hands loose, walking into the headlights like he owned the river and the night and the bridge and the men on it. He hadn't stayed away. Of course he hadn't. The deal was that he'd let me lead. The deal was never that he'd let me stand on a bridge alone. "She's telling the truth," he said, and his voice carried the whole length of the span. "Every word. So here's what happens now. You give me the old man. You forgive his debt, because it's already cost you more than it was worth. And you spend the rest of your life remembering that the day you reached for something that belonged to me, I let a 23-year-old girl beat you with nothing but her memory and her spine." He stopped beside me, close, his shoulder almost touching mine. "Or you don't. And everything she said happens, and your family ends tonight, on paper, forever. Choose." The river moved. Nobody breathed. The silver-haired man chose to live. They let my father go. He stumbled toward me across the wet pavement, and I caught him, this small gray man who had sold me, and I felt nothing I expected to feel. He started to apologize, a flood of it, excuses and grief and self-pity all tangled together, and I let him talk until he ran out. "You don't get to be in my life anymore," I told him quietly, when he was done. "Not because of what they did, because of what you did. I'm going to make sure you're safe and far away, and you're never going to see me again. And that's not a punishment. It's the kindest thing either of us has left." I stepped back. "Go." He went. I watched him get into the car Severo's people had waiting, the one that would take him somewhere with a new name and no way back. And I didn't cry. I'd already cried for him in a parking garage, before I knew what he'd done. There was nothing left. Severo's hand found the small of my back. Warm. Steady. "You're shaking," he said. "I know." I turned into him, and he caught me, and on a freezing bridge over a black river at 3 a.m, I let myself fall against the most dangerous man in the city, and felt, for the first time in my life, completely safe. "Take me home." He went very still. "Home," he repeated, like the word meant something. "Your home," I said. "Our home. I haven't decided which yet. Take me there and we'll argue about the wording." I felt him laugh, low in his chest, where I could feel it against my cheek. Home was the penthouse, and the city was turning gray gold at the edges by the time we got there, and neither of us could sleep, and neither of us wanted to. He kissed me in the doorway, and the careful man I'd worked beside for over a year disappeared. There was nothing careful about it now. His hands learned me slow, like he was memorizing something he'd been forbidden to want, and I let him, and I learned him back. I had spent 14 months telling myself I didn't notice him. Now I noticed everything. The heat of his hands, the catch in his breath when I touched the scar over his ribs, The way this man who controlled an entire city seemed to come undone under my fingers. "Look at me," he said, low and rough, and I did, and there was nothing cold in his eyes, nothing held back, just a kind of terrified honesty. "I have spent my whole life making sure I never needed anything." His thumb moved across my cheekbone. "You're the only thing I've ever wanted to keep. The only thing I never wanted to destroy. Tell me to stop and I'll stop. But God help me, Serafina. Don't tell me to stop. Don't stop," I whispered. The light came up over the city while he held me, and the world that had been all sharp edges and danger narrowed down to the weight of him and the warmth of him and the quiet certainty, somewhere underneath all of it, that I had walked into the most dangerous place in my life and found the safest. I had thought surrender meant losing yourself. It didn't. I had never felt more like myself than I did with his hands on me and his heart, finally, completely open. He was at my mercy in the only way that mattered, and we both knew it, and he wasn't afraid of it anymore. Afterward, he held me against his chest and traced slow circles on my back, and I listened to his heart slow down, and I thought, this is what he was so afraid of, not the wanting, the peace. A man like Severo didn't know what to do with peace. He'd never been allowed any. "Stay," he said into my hair, not a command. The man who commanded everyone had asked me for the one thing he couldn't take. "I was always going to stay," I said. "You're terrible at distance. Someone has to manage your calendar." He laughed, and I felt it move through both of us. "It's been a year now. The Marchetti family is gone. Not in blood, in the end, but in paper, the way I'd promised them. The ledgers did their work. The silver-haired man is somewhere with federal numbers stamped across his future, and the others scattered, and the river district belongs to Severo without a single shot fired for it, which is the kind of victory he says he's never had before and didn't know he wanted. A war won by a secretary's memory. He tells the story at dinners now, and I let him exaggerate my part, because he gets this look when he tells it. I'm not his secretary anymore. I'm not invisible anymore either. When he walks into a room and the whole place goes silent, I'm the one beside him who doesn't look away, and his men have learned that the surest way to reach the Pakhan is to come to me first. They call me by my name. Some of them, the older ones, have started calling me something else, a Russian word that means lady of the house, and the first time I heard it, I had to leave the room so no one would see my face. My father is alive, somewhere far, and we don't speak, and I've made my peace with the quiet of that. Some debts you don't collect. You just set them down and walk away lighter. Last night there was a storm over the lake, and the whole black tower shook with the wind, and I woke up and Severo was awake too, watching me in the dark the way he used to watch me leave the office. Except now, there was nowhere I was leaving to. You're staring, I told him. I'm working, he said, and pulled me closer, and the city flickered far below us, dangerous as it had always been, full of men who would still hurt him if they could find the seam. But there was no seam to find anymore. He'd stopped hiding the thing he loved, and instead of taking me, the world had learned what happened to people who reached for me. I was no longer his weakness. I was the reason the most dangerous man in Chicago slept soundly for the first time since he was 16 years old. For most of my life, I had believed that being safe meant being invisible, being small, being a woman nobody noticed in a corner. I was wrong. Safe wasn't a place you hid. It was a person who'd burn the world before he'd let it touch you, and who'd finally learned that the world couldn't touch him through you either, because you were not a weakness to be exploited. You were a wall, the same as him. The storm passed sometime before dawn. The wind died, and the rain went soft, and the whole quiet penthouse filled up with the gray light of morning. I lay there in his arms, listening to the silence settle over the city, and for the first time I could remember, the quiet didn't frighten me at all. It wasn't the silence of hiding, or the silence of a parking garage where I waited to be found. It was just the sound of the two of us, breathing in a place that was finally, completely ours. And I knew, with a certainty I would have laughed at a year ago, that I was never going to be alone in the dark again.